This happened 4 years back. It was the middle of winter, and the night was unseasonably warm without a hint of snow on the ground. I left my apartment around 8 p.m. to go for my daily walk. I worked nights, and my schedule was screwed up, hence the 8 p.m. walk. I figured I would cross the bridge into the city nearby. For further context, I'm a tall guy who's fairly athletic. I was in my late 20s at the time. I rarely had a problem walking at night, and at this time, I felt safe to do so. I put on my headphones and headed towards the bridge. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by old houses, a subpar Mexican restaurant, a really good Mexican restaurant, a sketchy gas station, some newly built upscale apartments, and finally, I was at the river enjoying the view of the bright lights over the dark flowing water not yet frozen. I crossed the bridge into the city, hit the crosswalk button at a four-way intersection. Then I noticed someone standing on the corner opposite, the only other soul I had seen outside this night. Seemingly, she was doing nothing, but I assumed she was waiting for an Uber to come pick her up, since she didn't seem to be waiting for the light to change. The street, ordinarily busy during the daytime, was silent. The light changed, and I crossed, headed in her direction. As I neared her, I noticed that she would cast glances in my direction, then look away, almost sheepishly. She did this multiple times, and I figured that she was unnerved by me. I'm sympathetic, figuring it must have made her uneasy, us being the only two people on a dimly lit street. As I passed by, I looked at her outfit, mostly because I thought she looked cold. She wore a knitted hat with tassels, a sweater that looked too thin for the winter, tight jeans, and a plastic child's backpack on her back. I thought she was in her teens at first, but upon closer inspection, she appeared to be in her late 20s or 30s. She had short, cropped light brown hair and a pale complexion. She was skinny and was average height. I was maybe a head taller than her. I walked by and continued down the street. I passed high-rise hotels on my right and left and made my way to Central Park. During peak hours, this place would be packed with tourists and locals alike. But that day, at that odd hour, and with a pandemic in full swing, I felt like I was the only man in the city. I admired the brilliant display of lighted trees as I crossed through the Central Park. Then, figuring I was at a good halfway point in my journey, I made my way around the old marble and stone library, back towards the bridge. As I turned the corner of the library back onto the street of which I came from, I nearly collided with someone moving towards me. It was the same woman I had seen not 10 minutes earlier. My noise-canceling headphones were still on, so I pulled one side out to say something by the way of apology. She said nothing in return. Instead, she stepped back from me and stood below the streetlight, not making eye contact. She stole tiny glances at me, that same tick I noticed before. I put my headphones back on, nodded a good night, and headed towards the nearest crosswalk. Reason told me that she must be headed in the direction I'd come from, since we nearly ran into each other, headed in opposite ways, but some part of me whispered that she wasn't headed that way. Sure enough, when I turned around to look, she was trailing close behind me, her stride surprisingly long and energetic. I found this odd enough that I continued to watch her out of the corner of my eye. Shortly after I reached the crosswalk, as I stood there waiting for the light to change, she caught up with me, passed me by, and stopped. A car went past, and as it did so, she squatted over her plastic bag a few meters from me, rifling frantically for something, looking up at me occasionally. I hit the button on my headphones, stopping my podcast so I could hear her better. What I found disturbing about this motion of her looking through her bag is that it stuck out to me as fake, as though she was pretending for some reason. She was barely looking inside, and her careless motion struck me more like bad acting. Something about her motions, the way she kept looking at me, felt wrong. The light changed, and I began walking quickly, but she was faster. She stood suddenly, darting past me towards the museum, swinging the half-open little pink backpack over her shoulder. I watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness beyond the reach of the lights. I hoped that was the end of that, and after a few beats of not seeing her, I let my guard fall a little, restarting my podcast. Beyond the museum was a patch of poorly lit sidewalk in front of a squat building with mirror-like windows. I wasn't far from the bridge now. As I made my way back there, I turned my head to look at the reflection of the buildings and streetlights in the windows. To my horror, a dark figure sprinted slightly towards my reflection, dreamlike. I'm not sure why, maybe out of sheer confusion, but I turned to meet her as she hurtled towards me. Perhaps surprised by my sudden turn, she halted mere feet away from me, staring. Her eyes were wide and they looked frantic, wild. She kept looking at my arms, then back at my face, as though sizing me up. My accidental bluff had worked, and in the darkness, I suppose I must have looked more prepared to fight back than I felt. She gripped something small tightly in her hand, though she held it off to the side, and in the shadow of the building, I couldn't see what it was. Seconds dragged as we stood there, staring at one another, immobilized by fear and confusion. I waited for her to make some move or attempt to use whatever object she held in her hand. Just then, to my enormous relief, a car trundled slowly past. A bit of my strength returned, and over my blaring podcast, I felt more than heard myself shouting at her, "What do you want?" No reply. I slowly backed away from her, expecting her to move. She just watched me, that same intense look on her face. I took another step back, then another, steadily backing away from her until I felt confident enough to turn away from her and carefully walk away. As I reached a better lit area, I began to move faster, all the while keeping my eyes trained on her shadowy form. She stood there for some time, statuesque. Then abruptly, having spontaneously abandoned whatever plans she may have had for me, she turned from me. Without looking for traffic, she crossed the street with long strides and disappeared around the corner of the building. Something about the casual air of it disturbed me. I kept my eyes trained behind me on my walk home, afraid that she would follow me. The bridge was well lit and I saw no signs of her. Knowing this was the only way that she could follow me and keep up on foot, I breathed a sigh of relief. I saw no more cars headed from the city, no more pedestrians out walking. Nothing happened after that night. I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops that night. I still regret having not called, despite my roommates insisting I do so. I just remember thinking that I wasn't sure what to say to the cops, that I hadn't really been attacked, that they wouldn't be able to find her anyway. I made up excuses. I suppose I must have been in shock, denial at having been nearly ambushed, especially by someone smaller than me, in my own city, so close to my apartment. One of my roommates called the cops for me. A cop drove through that area, but by that point, she was gone. So a woman with a little pink backpack. Let's not meet again. This happened 6 or 7 years ago now. I played soccer for 1 year in community college after high school. I knew this guy because he worked for the athletics department. He was another student. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a 1-hour gap between classes. This guy noticed me in the library, asked what I was doing there, and I told him I had an hour-long gap, and he started coming regularly to hang out. I didn't mind because he seemed like a normal guy. He wasn't waiting for anything, but he just wanted to hang out. He brought me little gifts a few times, like chocolate and stuff. He was being a little too sweet for someone I barely knew. I just didn't think about the red flags. With the gifts, I remember he always downplayed it. He'd be like, "They had an extra Kit Kat bar today in the office. Do you want some?" He never said that he purposely bought the Kit Kat for me. I know a lot more about boys now than I knew back then. I think he knew that buying me gifts would be too much, but he still wanted to do it without doing it. The soccer season for us ended before Thanksgiving. The only teams that kept playing after that were going to the playoffs, not us. After Thanksgiving, we had finals. In that brief period after soccer season and before Thanksgiving, he asked me about my classes for the second semester. To be honest, I hadn't been super organized with course registration, and honestly, I didn't know. Also, the counselors were completely useless. I didn't tell him that, but I remember saying I didn't want to have another gap hour like this because it wasted so much time. I don't think he was happy to hear that. He also asked if I would play another season, and I said no to that. I needed to manage my time better, and playing soccer every day was not helping. I think my mistake was that I just said too much and unfiltered. I used to do that a lot back then, saying too much without thinking about how it can affect other people's feelings. That was on the last Thursday before Thanksgiving, so no more 1 hour gaps to hang out anymore. We had Thanksgiving break, we took finals, and we had winter break. Everything was great. Winter break was when all the real problems started. In the mornings, this guy would literally show up outside my house while sitting in his car. The first time I didn't believe it was actually him. The second time I checked, and it was. By then, it was really clear that we both knew what was going on. He was stalking me, and that wasn't all. I posted on my Instagram stories sometimes about places where I was. This guy literally showed up there several times, like girly stores at the mall where he had no business being. He did lots of things like that. He also started pointing his phone at me like he was taking pictures. That was even weirder. I basically stopped using social media after this. After winter break, this continued. When my parents were at work, this guy came during afternoons too. I called the cops a few times. They went and tried to talk to him, but he basically told them that he wasn't going to talk, and that was that. I think the cops wanted to help, but they could never do anything about it because he was careful not to break the law. Like, he didn't trespass, he didn't make threats, he didn't show weapons. I have no idea what he's doing now. My guess is that he gave up. Maybe his little obsession kind of became old and he found other things to pay more attention to. At least I hope so. But if he still comes by, I have no idea. I think the most challenging thing is that I couldn't tell my parents since I know they would completely freak out. Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. I had never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to be in a massive city with over 4 million people. Ever since I was little, I always knew I had a half sister in LA, but my parents had this weird anger towards her that always made it feel like a taboo topic. Of course, I looked her up on social media and I knew what she looked like, but that was about all. We never actually met. She was never active on social media, so there wasn't a lot I could see. Out of nowhere, one day in my first year of law school, I got a friend request on Facebook from my half sister. Her profile seemed legit. She had Facebook friends, and her profile pictures looked like her. She sent me a message inviting me to a little dinner party at the park with her friends. We could finally meet each other for the first time. I was new to LA and had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was excited about that idea, but I had a lot of anxiety about it too. It'd be nice if we met, totally clicked, and became besties for life. But what if we ended up sobbing like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk to her and she just didn't click with me and started showing me attitude? Or worse, what if it's going well and we have some kind of disagreement? Someone said something hurtful, and then we both start crying in front of everyone. Honestly, if she would have suggested a cozy little bakery for desserts instead, I would have gone. But going to a park with other people didn't feel right. I thought it was like such a precious moment that I didn't want to be in front of these other people. I couldn't bring myself to go. I didn't want to risk having a meltdown in front of other people, and I was worried about how messy it could get. A few weeks later, I googled that park to see what it was like. Maybe we could meet up there together, just one-on-one. That's when I learned something was wrong. I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who has lived in LA for long would tell you that it's not a safe place for girls to be having a dinner party at night. The area surrounding that park has very high violent crime rates. It's controlled by gangs. Even people who do illegal business in the park are forced to pay a tax to the gang in exchange of being left alone. So now I was really concerned and curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my sister myself. She was an undergrad at the time at a local college. I had a friend who went to her school. I asked my friend to reach out to her on campus and asked if she would be okay meeting me. They connected and the three of us met at my friend's house. It was great. We got along well. My friend was also so happy for us. The three of us had so much fun. We weren't bursting into tears, but let a few out. We had dinner, we watched a movie, and we spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about the whole thing, she said that she hadn't used Facebook since high school, so clearly someone was impersonating her. I would have told her to report the fake account, but it had already been deleted. She knew she had been impersonated on social media though. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her. It was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. Someone has been impersonating my sister. They knew I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me in one of the most dangerous parts of LA at night. I have no idea what their motives were. I don't know if I even want to find out. Meeting my sister all these years later was a beautiful thing, but the whole backdrop was terrifying. My family and our friend, one male, two females, our kid and a newborn, just went on a walk through a trail near our friend's dad's house. What was supposed to be a nice outing started to get strange when a group of what felt like 40, but probably more like 20, walked past us, most of them wearing the color white. We think this is strange, but continue walking down the path anyways. Then they all, instead of leaving, decide to turn around and just start catching up and walking behind us. I walk this trail often enough to know the general area. We get a bit spooked amid the group's excitement and decide to walk into the path that's not really a trail, but we can hide behind. We wait for a bit, hearts racing, and I hear a small group on the path above us that would have ended up leading them to cutting us off halfway through the trail. I specifically heard them say something in a questioning manner about the 4 of them. We continue waiting a bit, and then we quickly head back the way we came from and safely got away. This just happened and I'm still convincing myself that we were just overthinking, but we actually had fear and the whole situation just felt fucking strange. When I was 17, I was on my way to town. It was pouring rain, cool outside. I saw a girl who looked around my age hitchhiking and stopped to pick her up. I lived outside a very small town at the time, and the possible danger never crossed my mind. She was kind of quiet during our 45-minute drive, so we listened to music. When we got to town, she made me pull over at a gas station. She pulled this huge freaking knife out of her backpack, laid it on her thigh and said, "I was gonna kill you and take your car, but you're a sweet kid. Don't ever pick up hitchhikers." Then she got out of the car and walked away. I've never been so shocked and terrified in my entire life, and I've not picked up another hitchhiker either. I'm a female. When I was 16, I was walking to a store near my house. I was a huge pothead and would walk to the neighborhood nearby to get my stuff, then take a shortcut through said neighborhood to the store to get some blunt wraps. I was walking through an abandoned apartment building, and a very nice dressed man walked through and asked how I was doing. I ignored him and kept walking. In the area I was walking, there's not really white men in suits, so I was thrown off. I get to the store and I'm walking back, and a white truck is parked in the corner of the apartment building, so I opted to go the long way on the busy street. The truck drove up to me and the same man jumped out and picked me up so fast that I didn't have time to even think. I was only 100 pounds at the time and wasn't nearly as strong as him. I tried to scream and hit him with my elbow, but no luck. A lady that's heavily on drugs, that's always walking around my city, came running up at us, yelling at him to put me down. He actually put me down and sped off. Almost 10 years later, and I always stopped to give this woman food, and actually paid for her to go to rehab, and now she's doing great, reunited with her grandchildren and working. Not as creepy as these other stories on here, but definitely never walked alone again after that. So I've been thinking about this situation for a while, even though it could be much of nothing. I'm a 19-year-old female. I was walking in the city one day on the way to the train home, and I get stopped by this man who's roughly 10 years older than me. He says I'm pretty and would like to get my number. It just caught me off guard and I agreed to give it to him. I guess my anxiety took over, as it was very unexpected. He starts asking me if I live in the area, if I've driven into the city, and where my car is located if I have, where I'm currently going, and where I just came from. It seemed odd and his energy was just off. I told him I had been out the night before and was on my way home, and he gave me a weird look of almost disgust. The way he was speaking, I just thought he was going to offer me a ride home, because he kept saying things like, "Oh, the train is so far." And I said I may be getting an Uber, which he replied saying how expensive that would be. The questions he was asking me started to make me uncomfortable. I was giving false and short answers to end the interaction. But anyways, he tells me his name, and then the interaction is over. A few days go by, and he messages me. First thing I ask is how old he is, out of curiosity, and he says, 19, which has to be completely untrue. He looked much older. There's no way he was the same age as me. I then Googled searched his phone number, and the name connected to it did not have the same name he had given me. I was suspicious that he gave me a fake age and name. We only exchanged a couple messages, and I didn't respond after the Google search and blocked his number. But I can't shake the weird feeling I got from this encounter. Am I overthinking? Or was this a potential trafficking or kidnapping situation?